Welcome to the Point. Got a very, very exciting subject to talk to you about this afternoon. We're going to be talking about the divine ratio, which is God's fingerprint on the whole of creation. It's very unlikely you've heard about this before, but I am really excited about this, and I hope you're going to be excited about it too. You see, God's a mathematician, and he's actually put a mathematical fingerprint on the whole of creation, including your body and your DNA and everything. I'm going to stop talking and just show you some pictures now so you can get the hang of what I'm talking about. I'm going to show you 11 pictures straight off. Here is the Ark of the Covenant. Very important, the Ark of the Covenant. Here's Noah's Ark. You know all about Noah's Ark? Well, that's Noah's Ark. Here is the galaxy, which God made. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There we are, that's the galaxy. The heavens and the earth, there's the earth and the moon. And you've seen I've drawn some funny little diagrams in there, which I'll tell you about later. Then there's our DNA. We have 100 trillion cells in our body, and they've all got DNA, every single one of them. And they've all got a special little code in them, which I'm going to tell you about, a mathematical code. Then we've all got human bodies. That actually is a model, and on the right you can see some funny little markings, which I'll tell you about later. It's called the divine ratio or the divine proportion. And then I'm going to show you human face with lots of little marks on it. You can see the human face with lots of little marks on it. And the reason that you find, and I find, human faces attractive is because they conform to the divine ratio. Then, as we go walking on the beach, we see seashells. There's lots of them there. And they have a special thing in there called a divine spiral, which I'll tell you about. And then plants very often have the divine imprint on it, called a divine spiral. Butterflies have a divine proportion. And I don't know if you like penguins. I love the look of penguins, and I never knew why until I did this study. And the reason is that they got divine proportions all over them. So I hope you're interested now, because there's lots of different things, some from the Bible and some from creation, some from outer space and some from your DNA, and they've all got something wonderful about them. They're all created by God. You say, the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and they all display the divine ratio, which is shows the incredible mathematical genius and creative power of Jesus Christ. Now, what I'm going to give you is a fairly short, 26-minute long teaching on pi. That's spelled P-H-I, pi, which is a very simple mathematical ratio. It's not complicated, it's actually very simple. Sometimes it's called the divine ratio, and we'll be talking about the divine rectangle, the divine spiral, the divine triangle, and the divine proportion. You can look those up on Google, you'll find them, but they're more commonly known in the secular world as the golden proportion, the golden mean, the golden ratio, the golden spiral, and the golden rectangle. So I'm actually going to use those words golden and divine interchangeably so you can get used to both words. They're talking about the same thing, but they prove the existence of God and his absolute genius, not only of the creation of all things in nature, but the fact that he gave a mathematical signature to everything in all of creation. And so we're going to be looking at various things, including the galaxy, the earth, the moon, all living creatures, birds, mammals, fish, insects, plants, our human body, and even the DNA in our cells. We've got 100 trillion cells within our human body. And it says in Isaiah 40, it's actually verse 28, have you not known, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary, his understanding is unsearchable. What I'm about to tell you is absolutely mind-blowing. So let me just tell you about pi. There isn't very much mathematics, so you haven't got to think I'm going to show you. What I am going to do is show you lots of pictures. But I just need to explain just one thing, which is this mathematical mathematically important thing called pi. So let's look at pi now. That's what pi looks like. And I do need to teach you some very simple mathematics, but it's going to take about 30 seconds, that's all. Let's look at an arm, and you can actually do this with your own arm. If you've got a tape measure out and you measure between your elbow and the tip of your finger, and then take another measurement from your elbow to your wrist, you will find that the proportions are 1 to 1.618. Now, 1.618 is actually pi. In other words, if you divided the long measurement, which is the elbow to the tip of the fingers, by the short measurement, what you'll end up with is 1.618, and that's called a divine proportion. And it's God's mathematical imprint on the whole of creation. The actual value of pi, it's actually a constant recurring number, but it is, on this picture, 1.618. That is the actual value of pi. Now, most of you will have done at school learnt about another pi, which is spelled pi. That's not the same. That's actually the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. It's in algebra, but it's not what I'm talking about now. This is the golden ratio. So let's come back to pi, which is the basis for the divine ratio. And just to explain it before we start looking at little pictures again, here is 3 lines, A, B, and C. Now, there's a long line called A, a middle length line called B, and a shorter line called C. If you divide B by C, and you're in pi dimensions, it'll be 1.168. If you divide A by B, it'll be 1.168. That is actually the golden ratio, and using that, we can construct what's called a divine or golden rectangle. So there's a rectangle, and I've put purposely a rectangle with the sides 1 on one side and 1.618 at the bottom. And just out of interest, you'll find that your A4 paper, your A3 paper, your A5 paper, and most books actually are, without realizing, people have chosen this particular appearance because it's attractive. So let me ask you a question. Which of those rectangles do you actually like the best? A, B, C, or D? Well, obviously, you're actually watching and I'm in a studio, so I can't hear what you're telling me. But what I can tell you is that the people who manufacture paper and books and all sorts of people in the media have studied this intensely, and they discovered that most people prefer C because it's a divine or golden ratio. Now, let's go back to that golden rectangle again. It's got 1 and 1.618. What we can actually do is something very interesting, and you can only do this if it happens to be the right proportions. That is a golden rectangle. You can square it. Okay, so you can make it into a square, and what is left behind is a red box, and that is another golden rectangle or divine rectangle. What you can then do is you can carry on with multiple golden rectangles, dividing them again. So you can divide each rectangle again and again and again. Now here comes the interesting part. What you can then do is get a red crayon and draw in, starting right in the middle and joining all the sides, what's called a golden spiral. Now you may think, well, what a strange thing to do. Well, let me tell you, that is the most attractive, that's one of the most attractive designs that you and I ever see, and we are seeing it all the time, but we've probably never realized why we find it so attractive. It's because it has all the divine dimensions in it. Now, enough of mathematics. I want to show you some pictures. There is the Ark of the Covenant, okay? Right, the dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant in Exodus 25 are 2.5 cubits and 1.5 cubits, and that is pi, the golden ratio. Here is the image, the altar of burnt offering, and in Exodus 27, the width and the length are 5 cubits, and the height is 3 cubits, and that is pi, the divine ratio. Here we've got Noah's Ark, and we're told the dimensions in Genesis 6, verse 15. The width is 50 cubits, the height is 30 cubits, and the ratio, 5:3, is pi. So there are 3 biblical and very important things, and they've all got divine ratios. But of course, God made the galaxy as well, and there you can see a golden spiral in the galaxy. God made Saturn, he made all the planets, but there are lots and lots of golden rectangles. Now, I don't know if you find Saturn attractive. I do. Not only is it beautifully designed, but it's actually artistically designed to look very attractive because there are lots and lots of golden rectangles in it. Here is the Earth and the Moon. Now, according to evolution, it all happened by chance. It was a big bang, and we happened to get an Earth, and we happened to get a Moon. That's absolute rubbish. I've actually put the Moon very close to the Earth on purpose, and the actual size of the Moon and the size of the Earth are in exact pi proportions. Obviously, the Moon isn't touching the Earth, but I've put them close by so you can actually see what I'm talking about. And I've drawn a green line from the center of the Moon to the center of the Earth, another green line from the center of the Earth to the side of the Earth on the right, and then joined the two with another line which makes a golden triangle, which is half of a golden rectangle. And let me tell you, that is exactly pi dimensions, which means the dimensions of the Moon and the dimensions of the Earth were designed by God in divine proportion, which is mind-blowing. Now, what about God and the weather systems? Well, here's a tornado, and I think you can see there is a golden spiral. So God makes tornadoes. What about hurricanes? Well, there you can see another golden spiral. Now, Hurricane Irene was quite recently, and I've drawn on there the actual spiral that I showed you earlier. And you can actually see the center of that hurricane is right where it should be, right at the center of the golden spiral. So God is totally in charge of hurricanes. What about our DNA? Now, we're very carefully and intricately designed, and we've got 100 trillion cells, which I told you about, but each single cell has got a genetic code in it called DNA. It's immensely powerful. I've done a special teaching on DNA, but what I didn't know until I did this study, it's beautifully designed. For example, each full cycle of its double helix spiral, the length is 34 angstroms and its width is 21 angstroms, which makes pi. The ratio is pi. And now, we don't need to go into the details, but DNA has minor grooves and major grooves in it. The details don't matter. Well, what does matter is the proportion. The major grooves are roughly 21 angstroms, and the minor grooves are roughly 13 angstroms, and it means they are in pi, or divine ratio. Here we have a human body. Now, we find, looking at human bodies, like models or just friends, human bodies should be attractive because God made them, and we're made in the image of God. On the right there, I've shown lots and lots of lines, and they are golden ratios. I'm just going to read out a few of them, but there are actually thousands and thousands of golden ratios in the human body. For example, let's look at a man here. I've done some ratios on the right hand there. The whole body height, that's from the head to the feet, and from the head to the fingertips is a divine ratio. The head to the fingertips and the head to the elbows is a divine ratio, or pi. The head to the navel and the width of the shoulders is the divine ratio, or pi. The head to the tummy button, the navel, and the length of the forearm are pi. The forearm to the hand are pi, or divine ratio. And as I said, there are actually dozens of examples of pi in the human body. Let's look at just closely, or slightly more closely, at the human face. We all spend a lot of time looking at each other, and we actually find each other attractive. We don't know quite why. Well, I'll tell you why. It's actually we've got the divine ratio in our faces. Because God has made our faces intensely appealing on purpose. Let's look at another face, and this has got some more lines on it. Human beauty is based on the divine proportion, and then, for example, in this one, the center of the pupil to the bottom of the teeth, that's a divine ratio, and the outer and inner edge of the eye to the center of the nose is a divine ratio. Now, let's look at some Hollywood superstars just to see if this works out. Well, you recognize maybe Jennifer Aniston on the left and Angelina Jolie on the right. Well, their faces fit into a golden rectangle, and by the way, so do yours. And there are dozens of examples of the golden ratio in the human face. The head forms a golden rectangle. The human face, the height divided by the width, is the golden or divine ratio. Let's look at another Hollywood superstar. In this case, it's George Clooney, and he has got divine ratios all over his face. That's why the ladies find him attractive. But actually, all men have got divine ratios. So let's take somebody who's less well known and look at her from the side. She has got divine ratios everywhere. There are loads and loads and loads of divine ratios on her face. This comes from Vogue magazine, and we look at that picture and say, well, that's pretty, and we don't know why. Well, I'll tell you, it's got a divine spiral on it. You see, God created beauty, and God put divine spiral. Long before Vogue magazine discovered beauty, God created it. Human eyes are attractive. There are loads and loads of divine ratios. I'll just give you one. The width of the eye and the width of the iris are the divine ratio. What about teeth? When somebody gives you a big smile, they're showing you a whole lot of divine ratios, golden proportions. Look at some more teeth. There's a nice big splitting smile. There are lots and lots of divine ratios there. Let's look at some ears now. Now, ears are carefully designed to catch sound. But God has designed these trumpets, if you like, beautifully because they've got a divine spiral in them. Isn't that amazing? Inside the ear, you can't see it, but there's a thing called a cochlea, which is a bone, and inside the bone is a nerve called the basilar membrane, which is one of the most important nerves in the whole body, because that's how you hear. Well, guess what? It is, if you look to that nerve, it's actually a divine ratio, which proves that God made it. Let's look at an arm. Here's a human arm, and you might think, well, that's a pretty ordinary arm. Actually, it isn't. It's a golden arm or a divine arm because it's got divine ratios all over it. Because God designed arms to be not only very efficient, but very beautiful as well. Let's look at an X-ray of a hand. There are 5 separate divine ratios in that X-ray. Let's look at fingers. There's actually divine ratios there. You can do that yourself. You can measure from your knuckle to the second joint and the knuckle to the first joint, and you'll find it's pi, 1.168. You can do the same with your foot. If you feel like it, you'll find it a bit difficult lifting your foot up and measuring it, but so maybe you want to get somebody else to do it. But let me tell you, your foot is full of divine ratios. If we go walking on the seashore, we're going to pick up shells that look like that. We'll find them attractive. Sometimes we take them home and put them on the shelf. They are full of divine ratios and divine spirals. When we go walking through the woods, we see ferns, and we think, well, they're pretty. Well, that's because they're divine spirals. Roses are considered one of the most attractive of all flowers. That's because every single one has got a divine ratio in it. There's a tropical plant. It's very beautiful because it's got a divine spiral in it. There's a pine cone which is absolutely brimming full of divine spirals. There's a sunflower, got lots and lots of divine spirals in it. There's a seed full of divine spirals. Now, what about creatures, living creatures? Well, there's an ant. It's actually full of divine ratios. Here's a snail. You may not think snails are very beautiful, but I'll tell you what God does. He carries on his back a little house which is made with a divine ratio in it. Fish. This is actually an angelfish, but virtually all fish have got a divine ratio. Here's a moth. It's got divine proportions all over its wings. Butterflies are made of a divine ratio. I don't know about you, but I love penguins. But the reason is I love penguins, and I didn't know this, is that they've got divine ratios all over them. And do you find dolphins attractive? Well, I do. They've got divine ratios all over them. Now, let's talk about the Creator. His name is Jesus Christ. He actually is a master builder. Some people think he was a carpenter. Well, he certainly was a carpenter, but in the Greek and the New Testament, he's described as a tekton, and strictly speaking, that means a worker of stone. He built houses, but before he built houses and built the doors and the windows as well, he was a builder before he came to earth. He created the universe, he created life, he created the DNA, he designed the whole universe, he designed the human body, he designed plants, animals, birds, the entire solar system, everything else, including DNA. In Genesis 1:31, it says, God saw all that he made, and it was very good. I hope you've enjoyed this little short presentation. I think it's very interesting. It shows mathematical design of the whole of creation. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to write to us, please write any comments to info@revelationtv.com. You can see this, again, if you want to, on my website, which is freechristianteaching.org. You can order free DVDs. They don't cost a penny. And if you'd like to be friends with me on Facebook, just go to my website and just go to Facebook via my website. So there we are. What I've been talking to you about is God's miraculous design system throughout the whole of creation. Whether we're talking about the universe, or the sun, or the stars, or the moon, or the earth, or the human body, or dolphins, or penguins, or the birds, or the the plants, or our arms, or our legs, or our heads, or our ears, or our DNA, or anything about it is not only functionally designed incredibly, but mathematically designed absolutely incredibly too. Only God could have designed something with such amazing design. Now, human beings can design things which fly. We can make 707 jets which will fly to Australia. That's clever, but they're not so beautiful as butterflies. They don't conform to the divine ratio. Seagulls do, but Boeing 707s don't. I'm not being rude about Boeing 707s, by the way. But the thing is that everything about us, it all functions beautifully because in our design, in our cells, we've got eye cells and heart cells and lung cells. They all work perfectly because of our genetic code, which is an incredibly complicated genetic code. But that genetic code itself has a mathematical imprint on it. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It is beautiful to behold, beautiful to look at, because it's got the divine imprint. Next time you look at a rose, think, that's got a divine imprint. Next time you look at your family's face, say, that is a divine rectangle. I'm looking at a divine rectangle. We're made in the image of God. We didn't happen by chance. If it happened by chance, it wouldn't be divine, would it? There's only a very small chance in millions that everything would conform to the divine ratio. But everything does conform to the divine ratio because God made it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. He chose you and me before the foundation of the earth, and we're made in the image of God. And this proves it. This proves, by the way, the Bible is supernatural too. I hope you've enjoyed this. We'd love to hear from you, and we would love to come back and see us again on To The Point very soon. And so much, and thank you for joining us.